Have you ever thought about what it would be like to lose all of your immediate family, that the family that you were born into, the small family unit that you grew up in?
The weight of the world hit me that night. I will
When
never
you had
forget.
to turn him.
Call family, call his sisters,
okay.
you know, and then they immediately went to Mom. And walking out, I mean, it was just like the responsibility was crazy. Or I felt like it.
That's Nana. If you're watching on YouTube, to like and subscribe. If you are listening on the podcast, please like and follow. We would love for you to do that now to help our channel grow and become a blessing to others.
Today I have my sister-in-law with me, and she has recently come through 2 very traumatic events that have produced a high level of grief, and I want to talk with her about those events today. When my husband passed away at the age of 55, you lost your only brother, also your only sibling, and then you lost your dad 3 months later, and then your mom, and I wrote a question mark. Was it 2.5 years? That's what I thought. Okay. And this brought about a family dynamic that at the age of 63, you've lost all of your immediate family. By that I mean your mom, dad, your brother, the family nucleus that you grew up with. So, and that really happened, and after that, after losing Donna, your brother, and after losing your dad, you were thrown straight into taking care of your mom that had dementia. So we're going to go back to chronological order. In 2019, all 4 of you are alive. Dad, Mom, Donnie,
Right.
you. And you're on a vacation, and you get a phone call. Well, just start there. What happened?
Well, I had talked that week to Donnie several times at night, and I knew he wasn't doing well. I knew he wasn't feeling well. Never dreamed what it really was. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the Thursday night before that happened, on Friday, I told him he was taking medication. It wasn't doing anything Thursday. And I told him, I said, I really think you need to go to the hospital. I don't think this is something that you need to wait. And he said, no, I don't want to go tonight, but I promise I will call in the morning. Mm-hmm. The morning came, and I got the first call from James, and he told me what was going on, but that was before anything was...
I didn't even know that.
Fine. I talked to all your boys that morning. But he was the first one. And then shortly after that, my mom called. And all of these things that I'll say about my mom just makes me realize where we really were, and we didn't know it. So she calls me, and she tells me about Donnie, that things, you were headed to the hospital, and I felt helpless. I couldn't get there quick enough. We were at Disney World. I remember hearing my dad in the background, and he was, he wasn't a very emotional fella, but I could hear him. He never called me by name. It was always Cat, and he just kept saying over and over, it's bad. It's really, really, really bad. My mom was as calm as a cucumber. And it took me a bit, like I was telling you a while ago, to get through all these layers. But I realized that it was bad, because he would not have done that, especially knowing I couldn't get there. Ken was already on the phone trying to get me a flight. And then John called. John's the one that told me.
Okay.
And when he called, the only thing he could say at the beginning was, I'm so sorry, just over and over. That was all he could get out.
Okay.
So that's where I realized everything, and we still had a few more days, but we started getting, plans to try to get a flight, and the first flight I could get was the next day. And I'd be flying all day. It was a Saturday. And I knew we wouldn't get home till like 10 o'clock. So I told my parents that day, I said, I don't want to come at 10 o'clock. You all need to be laying down, because Sunday is going to be difficult at best. And my mom said to me, you have to come. You're the only one that can do anything with your dad, and he's a mess. Walking up to that door was the hardest thing at that time I think I had ever done. What do I do with them,
Because your parents are like 79 or 80 at that point?
70. Dad would have been 79.
Yes.
Mom would have been turning. Yes.
Yes.
And she actually turned 79 when he was in the hospital.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That January. Okay.
In fact, Dad's funeral was on her birthday. Or Dad's viewing. Dad's funeral.
Yes. Yes. That's
Because
right.
Donnie's viewing was on Dad's birthday.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway, so that's how I found out, and I finally got back. And then coming to church the next morning with my parents was just...
And I remember thinking Pop was so broken. And, of course, I was reeling from it all. But I do remember noticing and thinking, oh, he's not okay. He's like physically, this is terrible for him. And then I remember, which you'll talk about, Nan being somewhat emotionless, which we knew she started into dementia, but I think this really...
That's a good word. She was void of any emotion, not because it wasn't in there. And that's what really troubled me so much, even when this happened, because I'm like, my mom called. She was able to call me on the phone. That wouldn't have happened a few years prior.
No,
somebody would have had to call me besides either one of them.
Right.
Actually.
Right.
But no, it was her, and Dad couldn't get it together. I mean, he just...
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of factors, but I think it played into him dying shortly after.
Well,
yeah.
And as we know,
himself to death.
With Dad, if you remember when he started with the heart.
Yeah.
And he started with
by October, he had to have a heart
trouble.
catheterization.
And I will say this too. We knew that something was wrong with Mom. We knew, we all knew. We just didn't want to admit it.
Right.
But we began to see things with her, prior to this, and it just brought it more. I think
it just solidified everything.
And I was very, very worried about Dad's heart. And we got him into the heart doctor once, because that was Donnie's doctor also, and he knew everything that had happened. And when I think of doing this on social media, when my dad went into the hospital, Dr. Rowe wanted to do some tests. And if you remember, it was the week prior to when he went in. But I kept getting text after text because I was staying with him. I was, not leaving the hospital even that time. And I said, Dad, there's this thing called Facebook. And I said, you can tell me exactly what to put. And I can tell everyone the same thing at the same time. He said, well, okay. So Facebook just started lighting up with comments. And I can remember at St. Mary's, he was laying in a hospital room, and he goes, another family book? Family book? Yes, and he just kept saying it over and over. And so I let him read those comments. He was so thrilled about this thing called Facebook, because, the only thing until then he had done is digital coupons at Kroger, and I did that, and he was so proud of himself. But anyway, I remember going through all of that and having the tests, and they determined that he needed the stent.
Okay.
And he had actually had a heart attack.
And see, I'm not a doctor or a professional, but I just really feel like that came about from grieving.
It was exactly what it was. And he just started hurting, and, we were going back and forth from doctors. And if you remember that day, that was one of the hardest days, and it wasn't what was being done, it was the way it was being done. Because my dad has had heart issues since he was 40. The Lord has allowed him to live a full life, and truthfully, he really didn't have a lot of issues. The quality of his life was good. He just knew his limits. But we went into the same place that Don had gone. Remember?
Yes,
and you had gone with him.
I had not really thought about that morning, and they took us straight into the
I could see it
last
in your
spot
face.
where we were, and I just that was one of the things that shocked me, was going back into that spot and realizing, oh, I haven't thought about this. It made me kind of freeze.
I was worried about you, but as I sat there, that was the first time. There was never a time in between before that with Dad's heart that it wasn't me, Donnie, and Mom. I mean, always.
Yes. Yeah.
And I thought, I cannot lose it right here. I just need to focus and, get through this. And you were sitting there and you were, visibly, I knew you were struggling. But anyway, I thought, this is the first time. Donnie's not here.
Right.
And that was when I felt a different responsibility. Not as heavy as it was going to get. But I was telling you earlier, they put stents in Dad's heart. My dad had always talked about heaven. He wasn't scared of going to heaven. He actually looked forward to going to heaven. If you remember, he wanted to preach and eat a bologna sandwich after Sunday night and go to heaven.
Right.
It's what he always said. And I remember being in the room, and that's why I was asking you earlier. I couldn't remember where you were, but I knew you were in there with me. And I was up at his head, up at his face, and he pulled me down and asked me, and I told him, I said, Dad, the stents opened up and the blood is flowing like a river. He kept asking me over and over, tell me again. I must have told him 10 times. And every time, tears would pour. And he looked at me and he said, I don't want to die. And that shocked. I was thrown back. I was so shocked. I thought, all my life, now you're scared to go to heaven? Just all of that security and belief that we had until you and I really started realizing after it was over why he said that.
Right. I think he didn't want to leave Nan.
He did.
Was it Pop that shared the quote a lot that he wished, when you'd say, how long do you want to live? And he'd say, one day longer than her.
He always said that. He said, I want to live one day more so that I can take care of her. Well, as he began to progress through the heart, after the stents were put in, I took him to heart therapy. We went twice a week. He was doing so well. He was seeing a nutritionist. That's another whole hilarious story in its own. But he couldn't gain weight. And the nutritionist one day was sitting there and I was sitting there with him. I'm in a room of all of people that have had all this heart surgery and I'm just sitting back there. And after it was over, she had a time where she sat down and she said, now, what is your biggest concern, Dr. Stein? What worries you? And he said, I just wish I could gain weight. And he looked at her with all seriousness, and he wasn't being funny. My dad was a very educated person. He would say things quirky, but you knew he knew. And he looked at her in full honesty, and he said, so I was wondering, if I go to Cookout and I get a barbecue and I get double onion rings, is it better if I drink a Diet Coke or a milkshake? And she said, I'll never forget. And I just looked at her. I said, yes, which would be better? What would she said, by the time you've done that, honey, go for whatever you want. But he was honestly serious because he could not gain the weight. And I think he thought if he could gain the weight, the stamina and everything. But truthfully, there was a lot lost that he just couldn't get back. Mm-hmm. And so we continued with that therapy, and he would ride and walk and his breathing was better. But on a Thursday, he was having trouble being all stopped up. Dad had asthma. And so he called me that morning. I said, you need to get to the pulmonologist. Let's just go and find out. So we went. They did a pneumonia test and a flu test both on him that morning, and they were both negative. And she said, you don't have those things, so I feel good. We'll give you these steroids to try to keep open up. So we got in the car, and he looked and he said, I am so glad I came here, because if not, I'd end up in the emergency room that night. Well, that day went on, and I took him home, and I would take their meals back and forth. We went back, and sometimes we would sit and have dinner with him. Sometimes I'd bring him to my house.
Sure.
But this night, he wasn't feeling well, so we went there, and he was really struggling. He was smothering, and I asked him about his inhaler. He said, this is different. I'm using them, not doing anything. I gave him nebulizer treatments. Nothing seemed to be working. And so we tried. That's the time my husband went home and got a recliner off the second floor, brought it all the way down himself.
Yes.
Brought it there thinking maybe he could sleep sitting up a little bit under a fan. Put him under the ceiling fan. He didn't sit there 2 seconds. So long story short with that, he went to lay down and he had a sleep machine.
Okay.
So we thought, well, maybe that, because that puts air.
Yeah.
And we're going to try it. So he said, I'm just going to take my medicine before I go to bed tonight. And he said, I'm going to lay down. So we got him all situated and he lay down and I went home.
Now, to be clear, this is January.
This is January
2020. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about that too. We're nearing COVID being exposed for what it was.
Right.
It was happening, but people didn't realize it or didn't want to admit it.
That's exactly.
Doctors didn't want to admit it.
That's exactly.
And this is 3 months after Don passed away as far as the relationship.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So my mom called me again and she said, and it's just so funny because I knew she was having trouble, but when she called my cell phone, she had to call numbers.
Yeah.
I was in her phone, but trying to get them to find Kathy and push it. It didn't work. So anyway, so she called me and she said, your dad has fallen and I can't get him up. So we were maybe 5 minutes from there at the utmost, because of curvy roads. We probably got there in one.
Exactly.
And we went in. He was beside the bed. And my husband tried to help him up. And he kept pulling at him because he could not breathe. And my husband literally picked him up like a child and laid him in the bed. And I said, Dad, we are calling a squad.
Right.
So he didn't argue. So I called a rescue squad. I'll never forget. I said, I have to call Jamie. I wouldn't have told anybody anything after all they had been through until I knew something. But Jamie went home past that house every day.
Right.
And I said, if he goes past that house and he sees that rescue squad, I'll never forget Jamie walking in the door. His face was gray. I felt so bad for having to do that, but I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
So he went, we got him to the hospital and Jamie stayed with me. And that night went very slowly for a very long time. And they could not seem to do anything. And finally a doctor came in and he said, we're going to have to put him on a vent. He said, but that will only allow his heart and his lungs to stop fighting so hard until we can find out what's going on. And so I had to sign papers, and they did. And they transferred him to the ICU.
I remember Jamie describing he went home to get things Pop
Jamie
wanted, and Pop couldn't even talk. He wrote.
We have
he
a
couldn't
notebook.
get enough air to talk, and he wrote the things down in a notebook.
We have a little notebook, and if you knew my dad, he's very specific about things.
Oh yes.
And so Jamie, it was about 2:00 in the morning. It was actually before they had mentioned the ventilator, and I was really glad that he wasn't there for that part because I just wasn't doing so well either, and he didn't need to see that. But anyway, he would write things down, and he wrote lots of things. Like he was asking Jamie about his sermon for Sunday, and he would say, "What you speaking?" I mean, he could not breathe. They had every kind of machine. In fact, they put one machine he threw halfway across the room because he just couldn't stand it. Mm-hmm. But they were trying to force air into him. And so he proceeds to tell Jamie that they're going to keep him, so he needed some things. And so Jamie at 2:00 in the morning is on the phone with me, talking back and forth with Dad about, okay, Jamie, turn to the left. It's up above the light, one over. Literally.
Pop was used to being a leader.
Having things. And he was he wanted the exact pose that he wanted to wear. Don't bring the wrong thing.
Right.
Just look, get it. I'll tell you where it is and get it. And Jamie's like, I'm looking at the left. I don't see. And I'm like, just pick something. Come on. So we get to the ICU, and they're very nice, but they work very, very quickly. And they had him for the first time. Well, right before they put the vent, they drained fluid. And it was huge. And he gave this sigh, and then he went into the most peaceful sleep before the vent. And I thought, he can breathe. Like he was breathing.
Okay.
And so they took him on upstairs, and that was, it was just one trauma event after the other when I think about it. But, been in the ICU, and he was in the critical ICU. They were very good. They were in there a lot. They never made me leave. And I was there 2 weeks. And there were two things I saw there that literally just unhinged me. And one of them was every day I would see a gurney with this thing draped over the top.
Yes.
And they would take yet another person.
Out of a room,
Out
like
of
down
a
the
room.
hall in front of you.
Right beside his window, his room was all glass. There was curtain that I could pull for myself, but, they had to see him all the time. They had that.
Every day you're seeing
every day.
someone's passed away on this floor.
At least one. I don't know that I ever saw anyone released. But anyway, and then there was this room. If I go out in the waiting room, if people would come, I'd go out in the waiting room, and there was this room that they would take a family in, and they would always come out crying. And I remember praying, Lord, I don't want to go in that room. I don't know what goes on in that room, but I don't want to go in that room. And we made a decision as a family, and I know I had to make it, but we didn't allow anybody to see Dad. We had people that came to see him that had known him for years that he loved like brothers. But they weren't brothers.
Right.
They were brothers in the Lord, and they were people that he loved and that respected him, and I was so pleased with that.
And you did that for his dignity, because
I did.
on event. And
It was all, I
it
didn't want
does-
anyone
yeah,
except
it's
the
hard way to
grandkids,
remember
your
that.
family, my family is all that was there. And then on Saturday, after Thursday, and Saturday, they could give me no answers. And on Saturday, his temperature went up to 107.8. Mm-hmm. And the infectious disease doctor came to me, and he goes, they would tell me it was pneumonia and the flu, which he had a test that Thursday morning and then that Thursday night in the ER, and both times they were negative.
Right.
So the infectious disease doctor came to me, and he told me, he said, I've been a doctor for 35 years, and I've never seen this. I've never seen a fever in a person with either one of those things.
I remember him saying that.
Yes. And I said, well, what is this? And he wouldn't. And I finally asked him point blank. I said, this is COVID. And he said, well, it's been here a lot longer than what we realized.
And the point we were at, to clarify for people, was we were hearing about it in other countries.
Nothing here.
And nobody had admitted or determined or exposed. I don't know what to call it. They may just have not known.
Oh, and that's what he told me.
Didn't realize it was here yet. And I do think they started to realize it.
Yes.
That week we were there. I don't know if you remember
the masks.
I know you remember this, but the nurses, because he was on a vent and it's doing your breathing for you, they don't feel like you're going to catch something when you're near the body. So when he was diagnosed with possible flu, they were letting us in and out and didn't have to wear a mask and all. And then all of a sudden, one nurse was like,
yeah,
everybody's wearing a mask. And I'm always the one who gets in trouble.
I didn't have one on either.
But, I mean, you could just tell light switch had flipped. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking back, I'm thinking somebody realized this could be COVID.
Right.
And they brought the hammer down on...
Yes.
Everybody needs to have a mask on in and out of the room.
And Mom would wear hers right here. Yes. Yes. Yes, she would. And I asked him, like I said, point blank, and he looked at me and he said, we don't know what to do. Mm. And so, fast forwarding a little bit on that, to that Wednesday, the doctors would come in all through the night. They did several things on his brain, because I knew with a temperature like that,
yes,
that wasn't good. So after 2 weeks of this and him not making any real strides, things of course had already begun to shut down, but yet then they would come back. It was very confusing. But I remember I left on that Wednesday and you came and you're like, get out of here for a while, go home, take a shower, take a nap. I'm going to stay. So I did, and I didn't get all the way home. And I remember you called and you said, I hate to even call you, but when you get back, and it was that room, the palliative team wants to talk to you.
Yeah, they want to talk to us.
So when I went, I didn't stay very long. And I went back up to the hospital. I'll never forget, it was on Wednesday in the afternoon. And they presented everything. And they were pretty much telling me that we could put Dad in a nursing home and he could stay on that vent for a certain number of weeks longer. And I remember at that time, I thought, this is everything he never wanted.
Right. They were specific about that.
They were very, very specific. And Mom was specific, and Mom we'll talk about later. But I knew, and I looked at them and I said, I can't do that to him. That would be just for me. I can't. But again, the weight of the world when they put those papers.
Oh, yes.
And I had to sign those papers. And I'd heard people doing that. I know I'm not the only one. Thousands of people have done it, but I can remember the fear and the anxiety of because they were going to turn off his life support. How could I do that? My dad was everything. Mm-hmm. We were extremely close. I had been with them since Donnie's death. Through those 4 months, I was with them almost every day. I would never have survived without my husband. And he kind of picked up and, took care of the home front because I was taking, I have grandkids. But anyway, so I said, no, I have to do this. So I signed the papers, and I never forget, the lady looked at me and she said, okay, do you want to wait till next week because we can keep him? And I said, no, today. I said, look, give us a chance to get all the grandkids here and let them all
everybody say their goodbyes.
Say goodbyes. And it wasn't that I didn't want, but I thought, why prolong heaven?
Right.
I can't. So we all were in that room, you included, and you read, we cried.
That's right. We did.
And we
read, we prayed.
We prayed. And if you remember, Mom, my husband would bring her because he couldn't be with me because somebody had to be with her. And if you weren't with her, he was, and my daughter. And so she would get to the hospital and immediately want to go home.
Right. She just didn't understand.
No, she did not. And she would sit beside him and she'd say, why isn't he talking to me? It's just, it did not. And even that night, I can still remember her touching his hand and told him, I'll never forget, she said, honey, it's going to be okay. And she rubbed his hand. No, but the nurse told me, if he can't survive on his own, you'll know very quickly. It'll be easy. Yeah. It'll be easy.
You'll know it's not.
And you'll know. The machine was doing all the work for him. It was less than 30 seconds.
It was.
And it was quiet. There wasn't the gasping.
No, it was peaceful.
Like
he just went.
He just went.
It was very clear that a man-made machine was keeping him alive and that his body had already
He was already gone.
And I think that's important because people who have to make the decision to do this need to understand that it's possible that death has already happened with that person and all you're doing is taking off artificial life. You're not making the decision
God made
to let your loved one die. Yes. Exactly.
But it was difficult.
Oh,
yes. As you can imagine.
So, of course, the decision to take him off the ventilator was hard, and then but he did pass immediately, and there was some comfort in the sense that, okay, it was just the machine keeping him alive.
Right.
What were your feelings after that?
I think much like the death of Dawn, I began thinking, my mind was a mile a minute. And I felt a huge responsibility, I think. And I begged them not to bring that gurney around until I could get out. And like I said,
because
it was
of the mental
Wednesday.
picture you had already had all week. They took everybody out.
I thought if I see it, I just couldn't. And I had told the nurses earlier, and I told that particular nurse that was in there, she said, I'm not even calling. You go ahead. So I remember getting in the waiting room and going over there where you could see the view at the glass, and I began calling sisters on both sides and family. And I turned around and my daughter had my mom, and I thought, okay, here we go. So I tried to put that all on the back burner, and I remember that night we got downstairs. Ken had brought up the car. We got in the car, and Mom said to me, are you sure you don't need to stay with him tonight? What if he wakes up and you're not there? And I said to her that night, I said, Mom, Dad is in heaven. And I said, do you remember what he used to say about heaven? Because it went through my mind when I gave him that last kiss. He used to say, I'll be in heaven before my feet get cold. Mm-hmm. And she chuckled. She said, I remember that. And I said, his feet aren't cold, but he's in heaven. And so for many, many times past that when she would say something.
Yes.
Said,
where's Dad?
Yeah. And she would say heaven. And I said, how did he feel about that? He was in heaven before his feet got cold. Mm-hmm. But no understanding. Really hadn't dealt with any of the grief.
Right.
I truly hadn't. I had pushed it so far. But we were talking before about how this is a broken world. God didn't. And when Jane was talking about that, I thought it was the first time I ever thought we weren't supposed to die.
Right. Not
this
supposed
is
to
all
die.
wrong from the get-go. I have heard so much lately that has, and that's God thing. That's what it is.
Yes.
It's the healing coming to realize that I had compartmentalized so much that I didn't deal with Donnie. I didn't have time. I didn't deal with Dad. I couldn't do it in front of my mom. You know, I had to be strong. My hardest thing, I still struggle. You know, I go, the first, after Dad died, and I know you had things that happened to you like this, but I fell apart at the fruit stand.
Oh, yes. The oddest places.
Went to pieces. It was so bad, I had to put my stuff down and go to the car.
Yes.
Because it was like the ugly cry stuff. It was terrible. And it was just, he loved to go to the fruit, and I would get this little text, what you need from fruit stand, head to the fruit stand, we'll get you cucumbers and tomato, you know, what else? One of my hardest places was to be at church.
Oh, okay.
And I struggled with that. And at the back porch, under that slab of cement, is mine and Donnie's handprints. And the year and our initials.
That's neat.
Over on the side of the education building, when you go down that little alley thing, there are rows there that the brick masons, I guess, felt sorry for us because we were standing out there watching them. But that's fascinating to watch. But we were really little, but they let us lay this much of the brick along through there, and they'd come in. You know, I'm sure they fixed it, but we'd set the bricks up there, so we felt like
that's neat.
We had done it. When I go out the back door of the education building, I don't think I ever go out that door that I don't see a great big hole in the wall. That, of course, is not there, but I can remember, you know, we first came here, there wasn't a lot of money. And so we did everything. You know, we did the cleaning, we did it all. The four of us did it all.
Together.
And I had a buffer, and I had it down in my stomach like this, because it was the only way I could control it. And it got loose, and it went right through that wall, and there was this big old hole, and my dad came around the corner, and I knew he wasn't gonna, I wasn't worried about being punished, but I was so disappointed that
oh no.
You know, and he just cracked up, which is not what I expected. And he said, honey, you're doing a man's job. Yeah. It's fine. But I see that, and I see, you know, when Donnie had a bike rack and put his face
I was
all
just
over.
telling the boys about that.
I still remember that day. It's just, you know, things like that that's what I want to remember.
Yes.
I remember teaching one day, and I was standing up and just teaching away, and all of a sudden, and again, my mom was little, I saw my mom running down that lane with a big yardstick. And I thought, what is she doing? And then I saw my husband going right behind her, and then I saw another man going right behind them. And I thought, what is going on? She heard the alarm, and somebody was breaking in the house. I guess she was going after him with that yardstick. You know, but when I pull up there sometimes, that's what floods my mind. Yes. And going in that auditorium, I was the first one baptized in that auditorium. And it wasn't an auditorium. It was just the shell.
Okay.
And it just had the baptismal there. There weren't lights. They just had these big things hooked up just for that, because our other baptism, the bottom fell out of it.
Okay.
So once they put that in, they started using it. And I was married there, and I played for my kids' graduations and Don's college graduation, well, high school and college. And, you know, if I'm not careful, but I want those to be good memories.
Right.
And for me to not be in church is not an option.
Okay.
You know,
just go and do the hard things.
You just have to do it and
retrain your brain to put out the trauma.
That look what God allowed through their lives.
Yeah, true.
That's what I look at. And although everything is different and everything has changed, that's just the progression of life.
It is.
And death.
It is.
Really. But I think I'm beginning to unpeel some of the layers.
I was going to say, you told me, and I'm terrible with time frames, but probably a month or two ago, 2 months, 3 months ago, I'm not sure. You and I would meet up, headed to the bathroom break after coming down off the platform, and you were struggling, and you just said, I don't know why this far out, I'm struggling. And I think that's important for caregivers, long-term caregivers, or people who've been through a lot in a short amount of time, to understand that your grief might not really surface for a while.
Yes.
And it happens so different, and there's nothing wrong if your grief has either just not come to the surface or not, or you've had to push it back in order to keep going or to do some things. It's important to understand that when it does surface, to allow it to happen and start dealing with it.
Right. And I will say this, and this is something I've had to deal with. Just because you're a Christian and just because you know the future, I don't doubt for a second that when my brother, my dad, and my mother closed their eyes on this earth, they were in heaven. I don't doubt that. Even at my lowest point of being so confused with God, I never doubted.
Good.
That part I got. But I also think that a lot of times people think because they're Christians, or because of, like us, we were raised in a pastor's family, which doesn't make you special. It just makes you hear the gospel, you hear the Bible all the time. And I kept telling myself, I know this is wrong. I know I shouldn't be feeling like this. They're in heaven. Why am I like this? Well, it's because I'm hurting. They're far better. They wouldn't come back if they could, because I knew I was already upset with God. And I hate to say angry with God.
No, you should say, but we should admit that that's what's happening, because people out there and they're embarrassed to tell anybody.
Yes, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my husband that part, because I didn't want to cause anyone else to stumble.
Right.
I just didn't.
I think there's even some danger to a person starting the healing process, and by that I don't mean one day you're just healed. I just mean the journey on healing,
on living again.
Yeah. Yes, on moving, not moving on without them, but moving forward in a life that you're still here. You have to move forward.
Right.
There's a real danger to, just cheerio and it's all fine, and not admitting that there are some struggles and some suffering.
Right.
That you're going through and questioning things. And obviously we need to get to the right answers. And you want the ultimate goal to be that you grow and that you can be a testimony and help to others.
Well, and like you see people, I am in the church where our ministry was. If I am having these issues, what is that going to do to a person that's listened to all we've always taught? Because we still believe all that. It's just, and I think that was the devil.
Yes.
Getting a hold of my mind, thinking...
That's pride in our hearts, in some ways. Like, I don't want anybody to know that I'm doubting.
Yes.
Or I'm struggling.
Or struggling.
Whereas
agree.
It might help people more if they realize, oh no,
they
are struggling.
Yes.
They are doubting.
Yes.
I'm not alone.
And okay, I was angry with the Lord. Other people, I'm saying, I was angry with the Lord. I found what was wrong. I can get that right. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I knew what to say. I even knew what to say to people to hope that they would feel better and know that I was okay when I really wasn't.
So some of the things that have helped you kind of come through, you're still going through it, and it will still be a process continuously. So when I say that, some of the things that have helped with the really rock your world doubts have been that you just got up and went through the motions, even though you didn't feel like it, or even though you questioned it. You still read God's word, because in the back of your mind, you know that God's word is factual. It is the truth.
Right.
And then you prayed, even when you felt like prayers weren't going anywhere.
I felt like they were just right
there.
there.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, you know what? You read in the Bible, and it talks about sometimes he just hears your groanings.
Right.
And there were times where I bowed my head and called his name and said nothing else.
Oh, I'm right there with you. Just don't, God, I don't even know what to say. I'm just here. And the Bible says he collects your tears in a bottle.
I don't have to tell you what I'm thinking.
You're right.
You know, so it's probably better if I don't say it.
Right.
So help me here.
Just want your help.
Yeah. I did that and still do.
Yes. What is it like to feel like your whole family that you grew up with is now gone?
It's lost, I think, or empty. I have a wonderful family.
Right.
I
right.
do, and God has blessed me. I do. I have friends. I have y'all. I have my family, my children. But it's different, and I live a long way from either one of the families, and that's always been hard on all of us because of where God put my parents, and so I miss them. I think about my aunts, all the time, and we text back and forth and try to keep in contact, but I think the worst thing, and I really struggled doing this, is the funeral. I mean, the gravesite. Because when it's almost like I don't believe it.
It's like there's Donnie, there's Dad, there's Mom. Everybody's right there. Mm-hmm.
Why am I still here? Why none of this happened to me? Why them? I mean, we came out here, we were alone. We didn't know anybody. We were a long way from family. Sometimes the family didn't quite even understand why we were here. And Donnie and I certainly didn't understand why we were here. But God did have a plan, and I think anybody that's seen the ministry through the years knows what that plan was. And I'm appreciative for that. But like this, I listen to this every week. I bawl every week. I know everyone that's been on it. I know already know their story. I know everything that they're saying, basically, But, and my grandkids will say, "Oh, Nan, are you listening to grief again?" And anyway, but I think it's helping, and I think it's going to help people. And I think you don't always know what you say or what is going to help, but this thing of hearing all of them as they go through all of these processes, and they kind of, with me, it just all was so fast and so compact that it just took me a while to unpack it.
Yes.
And I'm still unpacking raw grief. And just like him talking last week about the trauma and the grief, I never thought of it that way. Yeah. When he said that last night or whenever. It was last night in church. When he said that we're not supposed to,
not designed to grieve.
And so God sends you things. It just, sometimes they're not when we want them.
Right.
And maybe sometimes they're not even where we're listening, but they come anyway. And, my favorite verse is to be still.
Yes.
And know that I'm God. And in the traumas of my life.
That's what you can do.
Yeah.
Just wait on Him.
Yeah.
Listen in that quiet moment.
Yeah.
And He's going to take us through it.
Yes.
He is.
And already.
Give Him the glory for it. And like you said, I think it's important to remember it's not in vain, because He'll use it. If we will let Him, He'll use it for His glory. He'll let us help others, which is what, again, like you said,
and
we're trying to do.
It's helped
just
me.
to let people, hopefully it'll resonate with them. If not, if they don't learn from it, but they just feel connected, like I'm not crazy. But I mean, hopefully there's things that are being said that will help someone and
see it in the raw,
as they navigate.
It's raw grief, and it will be.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing your heart and being honest and transparent.
I was able to say words instead of boo-hooing.
You've done great. And even if you boo-hooed all the way through, that would have been fine too, because people need to understand that that's what happens.
It hurts.
Well, thanks.
You're welcome.